Commander David Okafor had the routes memorized. Diplomatic Station Meridian was massive, 5 kilometers in diameter, housing representatives from 23 species, with enough corridors and facilities to ensure that avoiding one specific person should be mathematically straightforward. Should be, 3 months into a 6-month posting, David had become an expert at avoidance. He knew Princess Sira's schedule better than his own, knew she favored the Eastern observation deck between local hours 18 and 19:30, knew she took her morning walks through the diplomatic quarters main concourse, knew she attended cultural exchange sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the mid-afternoon. Knowing all of this allowed David to be reliably elsewhere. The station's duty roster had become his tactical manual. When Princess Sira was scheduled for diplomatic receptions, David volunteered for security rotations in different sections. When her schedule showed private time in the botanical gardens, David found maintenance reports to file or equipment inspections to conduct in the station's industrial sectors. When her delegation hosted formal dinners, David discovered urgent need to review classified intelligence briefings that required his isolated attention. It was working, mostly. The problem was that successful avoidance required constant vigilance, and constant vigilance drew attention. Other members of the Terran delegation had started noticing his patterns. Whispers followed him through the corridors. The human officer who seemed uncomfortable around Talvari royalty, who changed his route when Princess Sira approached, who treated proximity to her like navigational hazard to be avoided at all costs. Commander Okafor, Ambassador Wei had said last week, her tone carefully neutral, "I've noticed you've been strategically absent from several functions where the princess was present. Is there a problem I should know about?" David had offered his most professional expression. "No problem, Ambassador. Simply managing my duties to maximize efficiency and ensuring broad coverage of diplomatic obligations, rather than concentrating personnel in single locations." Wei's expression had suggested she didn't believe a word of that, but was willing to let it pass. For now, the real problem wasn't the whispers or the ambassador's concern. The real problem was that avoidance was getting harder, because Princess Sira had started noticing too. He'd seen it in the way her eyes tracked him during the rare moments when they were in the same space, formal briefings where his absence would be more conspicuous than his presence. Seen it in the small frown that crossed her face when he changed direction after rounding a corner and finding her in his path. Seen it in the way her attendants watched him with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile, clearly aware that something was unusual about the human commander's behavior toward their princess. David stood now at a corridor junction, checking his datapad's schedule integration. Princess Sira's morning walk was concluding, which meant she'd be heading back to the royal quarters via the main concourse. David could take the service corridors parallel to the main route, avoid the entire section, and reach his destination via a slightly longer but completely safe path. He chose the longer path. As he walked, David tried not to think about why avoidance had become necessary in the first place. Tried not to remember the formal introduction 3 months ago, the moment when Ambassador Wei had presented the Terran delegation to the Talvari royal family. 90 seconds of carefully scripted diplomatic greeting, David standing at attention while Princess Sira's amber eyes, Talvari eyes shifted colors based on emotional state, cultural database had explained, met his with direct interest that he absolutely should not have noticed or cared about. She'd said something polite about looking forward to productive cultural exchange. He'd responded with equally polite anticipation of learning from Talvari diplomatic expertise. The entire interaction had been professionally perfect and diplomatically meaningless, except for the way her eyes had lingered on his face a moment longer than protocol required, except for the small smile that had nothing to do with formal courtesy and everything to do with genuine warmth. Except for the moment when David had felt himself responding to that warmth despite every training module about maintaining professional boundaries with diplomatic contacts. He'd recognized the danger immediately. Had understood in that 90-second interaction that Princess Sira was remarkable in ways that transcended her title, that being near her would make him forget his place, his orders, the careful distance required to protect both of them from complications that could damage everything they were both trying to build. So he'd started avoiding her, made it systematic, made it thorough, made it obvious enough that people noticed but ambiguous enough that they couldn't identify the real reason. Better they think he was arrogant or afraid than that they realize the truth. That David Okafor, human commander with 6 years of diplomatic service and consistent excellence ratings, had looked at Princess Sira of the Talvari sovereignty and immediately known she was dangerous, not to his career or his mission, but to his ability to maintain the careful emotional discipline that diplomatic service required. His datapad chimed. Message from Lieutenant Hayes. Commander, your presence is requested at the Strategic Coordination Briefing, Conference Room 714, 0 hours. Princess Sira's Chief Security Advisor will be presenting updated station protocols. David checked the schedule. Princess Sira would not be at the briefing. She had cultural exchange sessions scheduled during that time. Safe. He confirmed attendance and continued toward the human delegation quarters. His route carefully plotted to avoid any potential intersection with royal entourage traffic patterns. He didn't see the Talvari attendant watching him from a side corridor, didn't know that his avoidance had been noted and reported, didn't realize that Princess Sira had started asking questions about the human commander who seemed determined never to be in the same space as her for longer than absolutely necessary. If he had known, he might have adjusted his tactics, might have realized that systematic avoidance was itself a pattern that drew attention, that sometimes the best camouflage is simply being one of many rather than standing out through absence. But David was operating on the principle that distance was safety, that if he could just avoid direct interaction for 3 more months, the posting would end. He'd return to Earth, and whatever he felt watching Princess Sira from across briefing rooms would fade into professional memory, rather than becoming complication that damaged carefully built diplomatic relationships. It was a good plan. It would have worked if Princess Sira had been willing to accept his avoidance without understanding why. But she wasn't, and she was about to stop accepting silence instead of answers. Princess Sira noticed the pattern 3 weeks into the exchange program. At first, she'd attributed it to chance. Diplomatic stations were vast, schedules complex. The probability of regularly encountering every delegation member was statistically low. But statistics didn't explain systematic absence. Commander Okafor was avoiding her, deliberately, carefully, and with enough skill that it had taken her 3 weeks to be certain of it. Sira sat in her private quarters, reviewing the day's schedule while her primary attendant, Kishara, prepared the evening's formal attire. The quarters were luxurious by station standards. The Talvari sovereignty's influence ensured their princess received accommodations befitting her status, but they felt increasingly like a gilded cage as the posting extended. Kishara, Sira said, keeping her voice casual, have you noticed anything unusual about the human commander, Okafor? Kishara's ears, long and elegant like all Talvari, currently positioned in attentive focus, tilted slightly. Unusual in what sense, Highness? In the sense that he seems remarkably skilled at being elsewhere whenever I'm present. 3 diplomatic receptions in the past 2 weeks, and Commander Okafor was conspicuously absent from all of them despite other human delegation members attending. The observation deck, which I'm told is popular with the human officers, always seems to empty shortly before I arrive. Even in corridors, I've noticed him changing direction upon seeing me. Kishara's expression suggested this wasn't news to her. The other attendants have noticed as well, Highness. There's been speculation about his motivations. What kind of speculation? Some believe he harbors anti-Talvari sentiment, that he finds our customs distasteful and prefers to minimize contact. Others suggest he's intimidated by your status, uncomfortable around royalty. A few propose he's simply arrogant, a human from a young species dismissing the importance of proper diplomatic courtesies. Sierra's hand tightened on her datapad. And what do you believe? Kishara was quiet for a moment, considering. She'd been Sierra's attendant for 8 years, long enough to speak with unusual candor. I believe none of those explanations fit his record, Highness. Commander Akafor has 6 years of diplomatic service with consistently excellent cultural sensitivity ratings. He served postings with 4 different species, including the Velari, whose protocols are notoriously complex. This is not someone who struggles with appropriate behavior around other cultures or authority figures. Then what's his reason? I don't know, Highness, but I don't think it's contempt or fear. Those would manifest differently. Active avoidance has to be deliberate, requires effort and planning. Whatever his motivation, he's working to maintain distance. That suggests purpose rather than simple discomfort. Sierra stood, moving to the window that overlooked the station's central hub. Ships came and went, diplomatic delegations arriving and departing, the endless dance of galactic politics visible in metal and light. I want to understand. This is unusual. I spend my entire life surrounded by people seeking proximity, angling for access, using every opportunity to establish connection that might be leveraged for political advantage. Being actively avoided is novel and troubling, Highness. Sierra turned to face her attendant. Kishara, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to be honest about whether I'm reading too much into insignificant events. Of course, Highness. When I met Commander Akafor at the initial reception, the formal introduction with the human delegation, there was a moment, brief, probably meaningless, but he looked at me without the usual calculation I see in diplomatic contacts. No assessment of what my favor might be worth, no positioning for advantage. Just straightforward respect and something that looked like genuine interest before he shuttered it. Kishara's ears tilted forward, surprise. You're suggesting he might have developed inappropriate feelings, Highness, and is avoiding you to prevent those feelings from causing complications. I don't know what I'm suggesting. Maybe I'm projecting, seeing significance in ordinary professional courtesy because I'm so unused to not being pursued that absence feels meaningful. Sierra laughed, but it came out bitter. Listen to me. The princess upset that one person out of hundreds isn't seeking her attention. How remarkably self-centered. It's not self-centered to notice when someone's behavior doesn't follow expected patterns, Highness. And if Commander Akafor is avoiding you for the reasons you suggest. Kishara paused, choosing words carefully. That would show remarkable consideration. Most beings don't think about how their attention might complicate your life. They think about what your attention might do for theirs. Sierra returned to her seat, pulled up Commander Akafor's file on her datapad. She'd read it before, basic due diligence about all delegation members, but now she studied it more carefully. Age 32, human standard years. Born on Earth, Nigeria region. Military Academy graduate, served 3 years active duty before transferring to Diplomatic Corps. Specialization in cultural integration and first contact protocols. Languages: English, Mandarin, Swahili, Talvari proficient, Velari conversational, 3 others listed as basic competency. The accompanying image showed a man with dark skin, close-cropped hair, brown eyes that looked directly at the camera with the kind of steady attention that suggested he actually listened when people spoke, rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. Commendations listed included exceptional cultural sensitivity during Velari trade negotiations, instrumental in resolving misunderstanding between Terran and Kryn delegations, consistently demonstrates ability to build rapport across species boundaries while maintaining appropriate professional distance. That last phrase caught Sierra's attention. Maintaining appropriate professional distance. That's what he was doing with her, maintaining distance. The question was why the distance needed to be so dramatic. Kishara, I want to speak with him. Privately, without formal protocols or attendance present. Kishara's ears flattened, alarm. Highness, that would be highly irregular. A private meeting between the princess and a foreign delegation member without proper supervision. The implications. I know the implications. I know how it would be interpreted if anyone found out. But I need to understand what's happening, and that won't happen through formal channels where every word is calculated for political effect. I need honest conversation, which requires privacy. Highness, I must advise against this. If discovered, the scandal could damage both your reputation and Alliance-Dalvari relations. For the sake of understanding one man's unusual behavior, the risk seems disproportionate. Sierra met her attendant's eyes. Kishara, I've spent 28 years living according to what's appropriate, what's expected, what's politically wise. Every relationship I have is filtered through protocol. Every conversation is analyzed for implications. I'm tired, and I've found someone who seems to be avoiding me specifically to protect me from complications his presence might cause, and that's... She stopped, searched for words. That's the most considerate thing anyone has done for me in years. I want to tell him he doesn't have to, that I appreciate the gesture, but I'd rather navigate complications together than avoid them through isolation. And if he refuses, if he believes continued distance is truly the best approach, then at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll have offered the choice instead of having it made for me without my input. Sierra made a decision, straightened her posture into the bearing that came from years of royal training. Find a way to arrange it. Somewhere private, somewhere we won't be observed. And make sure no one can trace the meeting back to official schedules or logged activities. Kishara bowed, acknowledging the order even as her ears remained flattened in concern. As you wish, Highness. Though I pray this doesn't become the decision we both regret. After Kishara left, Sierra sat alone with her thoughts and her datapad and the image of a human commander who'd looked at her once with genuine interest before deliberately choosing distance. Most people wanted to be near power. Commander David Okafor was working very hard to stay away from it. Sierra wanted to understand why, needed to understand why. Because in a life defined by people who wanted things from her, someone who apparently wanted nothing was remarkable enough to pursue. Even if pursuing him meant violating protocols she'd followed her entire life. Even if it meant risking the complications he was clearly trying to spare her from. Sometimes understanding mattered more than safety. Sierra just hoped she wasn't about to discover that his avoidance was simple indifference dressed up as consideration. That would hurt more than she wanted to admit. The botanical garden was supposed to be private. Sierra had chosen it carefully, a lesser-known section of the station, maintained primarily for atmospheric regulation rather than aesthetic purposes, rarely visited by delegation members who preferred the more dramatic displays in the station's main garden complex. Kishara had arranged the meeting with characteristic efficiency and discretion. A message had been delivered to Commander Okafor, phrased as a request for informal consultation about cultural exchange protocols. Meeting location specified as the small botanical garden in Section 7 Delta. Time set for local evening when most delegation members would be at dinner. No official record, no logged schedules, just two people meeting to talk if David chose to accept the invitation. Sierra arrived 10 minutes early, partly from royal habit of punctuality and partly from nervousness that felt both strange and appropriate. She was wearing simple civilian clothing rather than formal attire, her long hair bound in a practical style instead of the elaborate arrangements court protocol required. To any casual observer, she might be an off-duty technician rather than Dalvari royalty. The garden was beautiful in an understated way. Earth plants mixed with Dalvari species, creating hybrid ecosystem that required careful environmental management but produced remarkable aesthetic results. Sierra found herself drawn to a flowering plant that her datapad identified as a rose, brought by the human delegation as a gift to the station, representing Earth's biodiversity and humanity's agricultural traditions. The flowers were deep red, their scent subtle but pleasant. Sierra was examining the thorns, nature's protection mechanism, beautiful and dangerous simultaneously, when she heard footsteps. She turned to find Commander Akafor frozen in the garden entrance, his expression cycling through surprise, dismay, and something like resignation in rapid succession. For a moment, she thought he would leave, saw him actually take a step backward, and something in Sierra broke at that small retreat, at the confirmation that he really was going out of his way to avoid being near her. "Commander Akafor," she said, and her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "A moment of your time." He straightened to attention, professional soldier taking orders. "Your Highness, why are you avoiding me?" The directness of the question clearly caught him off guard. Sierra saw him search for diplomatic evasion, saw him discard several potential responses. Finally, he said, "I'm not sure what your Highness means." "Don't." Sierra moved closer, watched him force himself to hold position rather than retreat. "I'm not a fool, Commander. For 3 months, you've been systematically ensuring we never cross paths. You change your shifts, alter your routes, volunteer for assignments that keep you far from royal quarters. The entire diplomatic corps has noticed. So I'll ask again, why are you avoiding me?" David's jaw tightened and Sierra saw the war happening behind his eyes, duty versus honesty, protocol versus truth. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, careful. "Because being near you is dangerous, Your Highness." "Dangerous?" Sierra repeated the word, testing it. "Sierra, please call me Sierra." David blinked, clearly thrown by the informality. "Sierra, you're not just a person. You're a political symbol, a diplomatic asset, the heir to one of the most powerful civilizations in known space. Every relationship you have is analyzed for political implications. Every person near you is assessed as either potential ally or potential threat to Talvari interests." He met her eyes directly now, and Sierra saw pain there, and determination, and something that looked like anguish. "If people knew that I had personal feelings for you, if courtiers noticed that I looked at you as more than just a diplomatic contact, those feelings would be weaponized, used to create scandal, to suggest inappropriate relationships, to undermine your authority and damage Alliance-Talvari relations. Your position is complicated enough without adding rumors about improper connections to foreign delegation members." Sierra felt tears pricking at her eyes, felt them spill over before she could stop them. In 28 years of navigating court politics and diplomatic maneuvering, no one had ever considered what their presence in her life might cost her. Everyone pushed forward, sought proximity, angled for advantage. Even those who claimed to care about her had never stopped to ask whether their caring might hurt her. "You're protecting me," she said, and her voice was rough with emotion. "By staying away, by letting people think you're arrogant or afraid or culturally insensitive, you're accepting those assumptions to prevent them from making worse ones." "Yes." David's expression was anguished. "Sierra, I know how it looks. I know the whispers, the speculation. Let them think I'm dismissive or uncomfortable. Better that than them realizing the truth, that I think about you constantly, that I track your schedule so I can avoid you, that staying away from you is the hardest thing I do every day because every instinct I have wants to move toward you instead of away." The tears were falling freely now, and Sierra didn't bother hiding them. "This is absurd. The most considerate thing anyone's ever done for me, and it consists of refusing to be near me. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize." Sierra wiped at her tears with impatience that was thoroughly unroyal. "David, I'm using your name because I can't keep this formal, not after what you just said. What you're doing is kind, thoughtful, protective. It's also incredibly lonely for both of us." David's expression suggested he agreed but didn't know what to say. Sierra continued, working through thoughts as she spoke them. I've accepted that people like me don't get genuine relationships. Everything is political. Everything is calculated for maximum advantage. But you looked at me and saw someone worth protecting, even when that protection meant denying yourself something you wanted. That's remarkable, David. That's the most respect anyone has shown me in years. It doesn't feel respectful, David said quietly. It feels like cowardice, like I'm taking the safe path instead of the honest one. You're taking the path that protects me from complications I didn't ask for. That's not cowardice. That's consideration. Sierra moved closer, still not touching but close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to notice the tension in his shoulders. But David, I didn't ask you to protect me from this. I'm asking you to let me choose whether I want protection or connection. And if connection damages you, if courtiers discover that he struggled for words, that there's something between us, Sierra finished. They'll try to weaponize it, yes. They'll create scandal, spread rumors, use it to undermine my authority or damage alliance relations or any number of political machinations. But David, that's always the risk with anything I do. Every decision I make is analyzed and potentially weaponized. I can't live in fear of political fallout, or I'd never make any choices at all. She took a breath, steadied herself. I want to know if what I felt during our introduction, that moment of genuine connection, I want to know if it was real or if I imagined it because I was so startled by someone looking at me like a person instead of a political asset. I want to find out if we actually have something worth risking complications for, or if we're both romanticizing a 90-second interaction. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried wonder and fear in equal measure. I've been asking myself the same question for 3 months, wondering if I built something meaningful out of one brief encounter because I wanted it to be meaningful. Then help me find out, Sierra said. Not through grand gestures or public declarations that would force political crises, just through moments like this, private conversations, honest interactions, seeing if what we think we felt is real or if it's just loneliness dressed up as connection. That's dangerous, David warned. If we're discovered, then we'll deal with it together. Because I'm tired of dealing with everything alone. And you've just spent 3 months protecting me through isolation, when what I actually needed was someone willing to stand beside me and face complications together instead of hiding from them. David's expression cycled through several emotions: resistance, desire, fear, hope. Finally, he said, I don't know how to do this carefully, how to build something real while maintaining enough distance that we don't create immediate scandal. Neither do I, Sierra admitted. But David, you've spent 3 months being carefully absent. Surely being carefully present can't be harder. It's much harder. Absence is simple. Presence requires constant navigation of boundaries and appropriate behaviors, and he stopped, seemed to realize he was listing obstacles rather than looking for solutions. But you're right. If we're careful, if we're strategic about when and where we see each other, maybe we can have something. I don't know what to call it. Call it what it is, Sierra said. 2 people who are interested in each other, trying to explore that interest despite the galaxy's best efforts to make it politically inconvenient. David laughed, and the sound carried relief and nervousness. When you put it that way, it sounds almost reasonable. It's not reasonable at all. It's probably foolish and definitely risky, and will almost certainly create complications we can't fully anticipate. But David, I've spent my entire life being reasonable, being strategic, putting political considerations ahead of personal desires. And I'm tired, so tired. I want one thing, just one thing, that's mine because I chose it rather than because protocol demanded it. She reached out slowly, giving him time to step back if he wanted to. When he didn't move, she took his hand, the first physical contact between them, and it sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with Talvari physiology and everything to do with finally touching someone who'd been deliberately staying out of reach. "Sierra," David said softly, his fingers tightening around hers. "If we do this, if we try to build something, I need you to promise that you'll tell me if it becomes too costly. If the political fallout starts damaging things that matter more than whatever this is between us. Promise me you won't protect my feelings at the expense of your responsibilities. I promise. And you promise the same, that you'll tell me if I'm asking too much, if this compromises your position or your mission. We protect each other, David. Both directions. Deal. Deal." He smiled, and it transformed his face from careful soldier to someone capable of hope. "So what happens now? Now we find ways to be around each other that don't look suspicious, meetings that have professional justification, conversations that could be explained as cultural exchange or diplomatic coordination. We build something in the gaps between our official obligations." "Carefully, very carefully," Sierra agreed, "but also honestly. No more avoidance. No more pretending we don't care. Just careful honesty about what we're feeling and what we're willing to risk." They stood together in the botanical garden, holding hands, surrounded by roses and moonflowers, two people from different worlds who'd found each other through honesty born from tears and truth. "I should go," David said eventually, though he made no move to release her hand. "If we're seen together like this, if anyone reports a private meeting." "I know. Go, but David, thank you for caring enough to stay away. And for being brave enough to stop staying away when I asked." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles in a gesture that was courtly and tender simultaneously. "I'm not brave, Sierra. I'm terrified. But apparently I'm also incapable of walking away from you now that I know you don't want me to." "Good. Keep that incapability. I'm counting on it." He left through the garden's secondary exit, and Sierra stood alone with the roses and her thoughts and the lingering warmth of his hand in hers. Kishara appeared from wherever she'd been maintaining discreet distance. "Highness, are you well?" "I am," Sierra said, and realized it was true. "Kishara, I'm about to do something complicated and politically inadvisable and probably foolish." "I'm aware, Highness. I've been serving you long enough to recognize that expression. Then you should also know I'm doing it anyway." "I assumed as much, Highness." Kishara's ears tilted in what might have been concern or might have been amusement. "Shall I prepare for diplomatic crisis management?" "Not yet. Give us time to be carefully honest first. Crisis management can wait until we actually create a crisis." "As you wish, Highness." Kishara paused, then added softly, "For what it's worth, Commander Akafor is the first person I've seen who looks at you without calculating political advantage. That's rare. Perhaps rare enough to be worth the complications." Sierra smiled, touched a rose petal, felt thorns beneath the beauty. "Perhaps. We'll find out together." 3 months later, Commander David Akafor sat in a strategic briefing and tried to focus on tactical readiness reports while being hyper-aware that Princess Sierra was seated 3 chairs down from him, close enough that he could hear her breathing if the room got quiet enough, far enough that no one could accuse them of improper proximity. This had become their normal, finding ways to be in the same spaces while maintaining absolutely appropriate professional distance. Meetings with plausible diplomatic justification. Cultural exchange sessions where their participation made strategic sense. Corridor conversations that could be explained as coordination about Alliance Dalvari cooperation initiatives. And in the careful gaps between official obligations, late evening walks through the botanical garden where they'd first been honest with each other. Quiet conversations in the observation deck during hours when the station's rotation made viewing angles inconvenient for most species, but perfectly aligned for humans and Talvari. Stolen moments where they could simply talk without titles or protocols or the weight of political implications. It was working. Mostly. They'd managed 3 months of carefully building something real while maintaining enough discretion that speculation about David's earlier avoidance had faded into background noise of diplomatic gossip. "Commander Okafor," someone said, and David snapped his attention back to the briefing. "Your assessment of the security coordination proposal." David hadn't been listening. He'd been watching Sierra's profile, noticing the way she tilted her head when thinking, the small tells that indicated when she agreed or disagreed with something being discussed, the subtle signs of engagement that he'd learned to read over 3 months of careful observation. "I apologize," he said smoothly. "Could you repeat the specific proposal you're referencing?" The briefing officer did, with the kind of patience that suggested David's brief inattention wasn't unusual. Delegates drifted mentally during long technical briefings all the time. David provided his assessment, professional and competent, and the meeting moved forward. But Sierra had noticed. He caught the small smile at the corner of her mouth, the way her eyes found his for just a moment with amusement that warmed him through. Later, after the briefing concluded and delegates dispersed, David found himself walking the same corridor as Sierra, close enough for conversation, far enough apart that it looked casual rather than intimate. "You weren't listening," she said quietly, pitched for his ears only. "I was distracted by more interesting subjects than security coordination protocols. Subjects located 3 chairs down from you, possibly." Sierra's smile widened. "David, you're supposed to be the professional diplomat who maintains appropriate attention during important briefings." "I am professional. I provided an excellent assessment once I refocused. After being caught not paying attention." A minor lapse, hardly noteworthy. They'd reached a junction where their paths diverged, Sierra toward the royal quarters, David toward the human delegation section. This was where they usually separated, maintaining the appearance of colleagues going about separate business. But Sierra paused, her expression shifting from amused to serious. "David, can we talk, privately?" Something in her tone triggered concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but something's changed and we need to discuss it before it becomes complicated." They diverted to the botanical garden, their space now, the place where they'd become honest and where they continued to find privacy when they needed it. Once safely away from potential observers, Sierra turned to face him. "My father sent word. He's visiting the station in 2 weeks, conducting his own diplomatic tour of Alliance facilities. Which means I'll be expected to attend formal functions as his representative, participate in royal protocols, be visible as Talvari princess rather than simple delegate." David processed the implications. "Which means more scrutiny, more attention on who you interact with, how you interact, what those interactions might signify politically." "Yes, and David, my father, is observant, perceptive. If we're in the same room together, if he sees us interact, he'll notice. He'll see what I feel, and he'll start asking questions that could become very complicated very quickly." David's stomach tightened. They'd been so careful, had maintained such strategic discretion, but apparently not careful enough to fool a father who knew his daughter well. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. That's why I'm talking to you instead of making decisions alone." Sierra moved closer, took his hand in that gesture that still felt precious because they had to be so careful about physical contact. "We have options. We could revert to avoidance. You could arrange to be elsewhere during royal functions, maintain the distance we had before. It would be safer politically. And personally miserable," David added. "Yes. Or we could continue as we have been, except that my father will probably notice, and deal with whatever complications arise from that. Which could damage Alliance-Talvari relations if your father decides that your association with a human officer is politically problematic." "It could," Sierra agreed. "Or it might be fine. My father isn't unreasonable. If he understands that we're being careful, that we're not compromising diplomatic objectives, he might accept it." David studied her face, saw uncertainty there that she rarely showed. "Sierra, what do you actually want? Not what's politically wise or strategically optimal. What do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but certain. I want to stop hiding. I want to be able to interact with you openly instead of constantly calculating whether someone might notice, whether we're being too familiar, whether our careful discretion is still maintaining adequate distance. I'm tired, David. 3 months of strategic honesty is better than what we had before, but it's still exhausting to constantly monitor every interaction. So you want to tell your father, make it official somehow. I want to tell my father that I've found someone who cares about me, genuinely cares, not because of political advantage, but because he spent 3 months staying away to protect me before I convinced him to stop staying away. I want him to know that I'm being careful, that we're not doing anything that compromises my responsibilities, but that I'm also choosing to have one relationship that's mine rather than the sovereignty's. David pulled her into an embrace, risky here, even in their private garden, but necessary because she was trembling slightly and he could not comfort her. Then we'll tell him, together, and we'll deal with whatever consequences come from that truth. He might forbid it, might order me to maintain distance for political reasons. Then we'll comply, because your relationship with your father and your responsibilities to your people matter more than what I want. David held her closer. But Sira, I don't think he'll forbid it. From everything you've told me about him, he cares about your happiness. And you're happy now, aren't you? Even with all the careful hiding and strategic discretion. I am, Sira admitted. Happier than I've been in years, because of you. Then let's trust that your father will see that happiness and value it enough to allow it, even if it's politically inconvenient. They stood together in the garden, holding each other, and David reflected on how much had changed since the first time they'd been honest in this space. 3 months ago, he'd been avoiding her to protect her. Now he was preparing to face her father to defend their right to be openly what they'd been carefully in private. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation, diplomatic protocols reviewed, formal attire prepared, security arrangements coordinated for the royal visit. David found himself assigned to coordination duties that would place him in proximity to royal functions, which meant Ambassador Wei had either noticed his relationship with Sira and was cautiously endorsing it, or simply thought he was good at diplomatic coordination. He suspected the former, based on Wei's knowing expression when she'd made the assignments. The king of the Talvari sovereignty arrived with appropriate pageantry, honor guards and formal delegations, and all the ritual that accompanied the movement of one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. David stood at attention during the welcome ceremony, watched as Sira greeted her father with a bow that mixed royal protocol with genuine affection, and tried not to be obvious about tracking every interaction. King Thuron was tall even by Talvari standards, his ears adorned with royal markers that indicated centuries of rule, his amber eyes sharp with intelligence that had guided his people through decades of galactic politics. He embraced his daughter with clear warmth before turning to greet the various delegation heads. When he reached Ambassador Wei and the human delegation, his eyes found David with the kind of direct attention that suggested Sira had already told him something, or that he'd already noticed something, or both. Commander Akafor, Thuron said, and his voice carried harmonics that David's translator rendered as interested assessment. My daughter speaks highly of your contributions to cultural exchange initiatives. Your Majesty honors me. Princess Sira has been invaluable in facilitating human understanding of Talvari customs. I'm sure she has been. Something in Thuron's tone suggested layers David couldn't quite parse. I look forward to discussing your observations during my visit. Perhaps we might find time for informal conversation. It wasn't really a question. Of course, Your Majesty, I'm at your disposal. The formal reception continued, and David maintained his professional bearing while being hyper-aware that he'd just been invited, or summoned, to a private conversation with one of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. A conversation that would almost certainly involve questions about his relationship with said leader's daughter, Sierra found him later, during a brief break between functions. "He knows," she said without preamble. "He noticed us during the reception, the way we tracked each other, how we positioned ourselves to be near but not too near. He asked me directly if there was something he should know about the human commander." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That you spent 3 months avoiding me to protect me before I convinced you to stop. That we've been carefully exploring what we feel while trying to minimize political complications. That I'm happy with you in ways I haven't been happy in years." David's heart was pounding. "How did he react?" "He said he wants to talk to you, privately, tomorrow morning before the formal trade discussions begin." Sierra took his hand, squeezed gently. "David, I don't know what he'll say, but I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever he decides, I don't regret any of this. You've been worth every complication. Even if he forbids continued contact. Even then. Because you taught me that I'm worth protecting, that someone can care about me without wanting something from me, that relationships don't have to be transactions. That's not something I'll forget, regardless of what happens tomorrow." The next morning, David found himself ushered into a private chamber where King Thuron waited, his security detail positioned outside to ensure complete privacy. "Commander Akafor," Thuron said, gesturing to a seat, "thank you for agreeing to this conversation. Your Majesty, I serve at your pleasure. Let's dispense with formalities, shall we? You may call me Thuron. I'm speaking to you as Sierra's father, not as the king of the Talvari sovereignty." David nodded, surprised by the informality but willing to follow Thuron's lead. "My daughter tells me you spent 3 months avoiding her because you cared too much. That you were protecting her from complications your feelings might cause." Thuron studied David with those sharp amber eyes. "That shows considerable maturity and consideration. Most beings don't think about how their attention affects those with power and responsibility. Your Majesty, Thuron, I didn't want to be another person who made her life more difficult. She has enough complications without adding me to them. And yet you stopped avoiding her. What changed?" "She asked me to. She said she wanted to choose for herself whether to navigate complications with me rather than have me make that choice for her. So I let her choose." Thuron was quiet for a moment. "David, I'm going to use your first name because this conversation requires it. Do you love my daughter?" The question was direct enough that David didn't try to evade. "Yes. I love her. I'm in love with her. I know the timing is terrible and the political implications are complicated and the galaxy will judge her for choosing a human from a young species. But yes, I love her." "And what are your intentions regarding that love?" David took a breath. "To support her in whatever she needs, to be present without demanding more than she can give, to help her carry burdens that she's been carrying alone, to be someone she... I'm not forbidding anything, but I am setting conditions." Thuron leaned forward. "If you continue this relationship, you do so understanding that Sierra's responsibilities to the sovereignty come first. Always. There will be times when duty requires her to make choices that hurt you both. Times when political necessity means distance you don't want. Times when the galaxy's judgment makes everything harder than it should be." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because it's easy to say you understand when things are relatively simple. It's harder when you're watching her marry for political alliance, or spending years apart because sovereignty needs require her presence elsewhere, or accepting that your relationship may never be publicly acknowledged because the optics are too complicated." David felt cold wash through him. "Marriage for political alliance. It's possible. The sovereignty has many diplomatic interests that could be secured through royal marriage. I won't force it if alternatives exist, but David, you need to understand that possibility exists. Can you accept that? Can you love my daughter knowing that she might be required to marry someone else for political reasons, that you might spend your entire life as the person she loves privately while presenting a different relationship publicly?" David was quiet for a long moment, processing a future that hurt to imagine. Finally, he said, "I can accept it, because Sierra is worth loving even under those conditions, and because I'd rather have whatever time with her that circumstances allow than demand all or nothing when all isn't possible. Thuron's expression softened. You really do love her. Not the idea of her, not the romance of forbidden relationship with royalty, but actually her, including all the complications that come with who she is. Yes, I love her, complications and all. Then you have my cautious blessing. Cautious because I need to watch how this develops, how you both handle the pressures that will come. But David, my daughter is happier than I've seen her in years. That happiness is partially your doing. I won't take it away from her, unless I'm convinced it's causing more harm than good. David felt relief wash through him so strongly he almost laughed. Thank you, Thuron. I promise I'll protect her happiness as best I can. See that you do. And David, if you hurt her, if you prove to be seeking advantage rather than offering love, there are no places in this galaxy where you can hide from a father protecting his daughter. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Thuron. Good. Now, let's discuss how we're going to handle the political aspects of this situation. Because pretending it doesn't exist won't work, and acknowledging it openly will create challenges we need to prepare for. They talked for 2 hours, planning contingencies and discussing strategies, and by the time David left the private chamber, he had a clearer understanding of what he was committing to and what it would cost. He found Sierra waiting in the botanical garden, their space, anxiety clear in her expression. Your father didn't forbid it, David said immediately, and watched relief transform her face. He gave cautious blessing and very clear warnings about what happens if I hurt you. He threatened you. In the most fatherly way possible, yes. I respect it honestly. He loves you enough to be terrifying on your behalf. Sierra laughed, and it carried joy and relief. So we can stop hiding quite so carefully. We can be more open, yes, though your father made clear that there will be challenges, political pressures, potential requirements for you to marry for diplomatic reasons, times when duty requires separation we don't want. I know, I've always known those possibilities existed. Sierra took his hands. David, are you sure you want this? Knowing it might be complicated and painful and politically fraught. I'm sure, because you're worth it. Because whatever time we have is better than no time at all. Because I love you, Sierra, and love doesn't calculate optimal outcomes before committing. She kissed him then, properly, the first time they'd been able to without worrying about observers or scandal. And it was worth 3 months of careful discretion and years of potential complications. I love you too, she said against his lips. Thank you for being brave enough to stop avoiding me, for being honest about what you felt even when honesty was dangerous, for choosing me despite all the reasons not to. Thank you for not accepting my avoidance, for asking why instead of assuming, for giving me the choice to stop protecting you from myself. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by roses and moonflowers. And beyond the garden, the diplomatic station continued its work, unaware that 2 of its residents had just committed to navigating complications together instead of avoiding them through distance. It wouldn't be easy. The galaxy would judge, politics would complicate, duty would demand sacrifices neither of them wanted to make. But they'd face it together, carefully, honestly, with tears and truth and love that had started with avoidance and evolved into choice. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting someone